Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and I'll get right to business this morning. We're continuing our discussion of the book entitled The History of Romanism by John Dowling. We're learning of the Antichrist, how he came to power, how he has ruled and reigned throughout the Christian era, and how he has deceived the whole world, and how he will be destroyed when Christ returns. We here at Inquisition Update do not believe in a long, distant past Antichrist that had been long since done away with, nor do we believe in a future Antichrist that has not yet come upon the world. We believe the Papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist. He's a presence in the world today. He occupies the status of King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the world today. He's the persecutor of the saints. He's drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus, and has been for 1,800 years. And we're not deceived. And we're taking the time of this program to prove the Antichrist status of the Papacy. And we prove it by leaps and bounds. So much so that it is incontestable. We are not deceived. We know who the Antichrist is. We know how much power he has. And we also know where he got his power and seat and great authority. Not from Christ, not from the Apostle Peter, but the dragon gave him his seat and power and great authority. And we're proving it as we continue on page 182 of this book, subsection 2. We're talking about the so-called pseudo-Isidorian decretals, the false decretals, and the donation of Constantine. You see, the Pope had a problem, and that is that if it is a divine institution and is the vicar of Christ on the earth, the spokesman for Christ on the earth, or Jesus Christ hidden under a veil of flesh, like the Papacy teaches, then it must have gotten its power from God. And if God gives power, you have it by divine decree. And you begin to exercise all the power of Christ on the earth from the beginning, don't you? You don't have to work and struggle and lie and deceive and commit treason and genocide and regicide to get this power. No, if you get it from Christ, you have it immediately and you exercise it immediately. But the trouble is, the true history of the popes reveals that they committed every sort of wickedness to claw and dig and scratch its way to the top. First, to the Lord of Lords status, bishop, universal bishop of over all the churches, and then finally to become a king of a nation, of a province, and to be a king among kings, and eventually king of all kings. And it has taken the Papacy nearly 1,800 years to establish the status that he enjoys in the world today. So, to cover up this diabolical history of the Papacy, an opportunity arose when it became apparent that there was a gap in the history of the popes. The Papacy has always claimed that Peter was the first pope, and they can count 1, 2, or 3 centuries of popes from him, but then there's a gap. There's a missing record. And the Papacy claims to be the successor of Peter, that there's an unbroken chain of succession from Peter to the current reigning pope. And there's this embarrassing gap in the record. They have to fill this gap to justify themselves. So they create popes to fill in the gaps, assign names to them, and then while they're at it, they write histories and decrees and oracles of these popes as though they had, throughout all their popedoms, enjoyed divine right status, all-powerful status, Christ-like status. And they operated according to that status. Now, it was all manufactured by the papacy to shed the onus of all this wickedness that history records that the popes underwent in order to achieve their status. They just simply, out of these made-up histories of these made-up popes to fill in this gap that they had always exercised. All the popes had always exercised Christ-like power and authority. And so the world would forget, literally, how the popes dug and scratched and clawed and killed and assassinated, committed treason, and every other sinful, wicked means to achieve their power. It was to whitewash the record. It was to rewrite history. That's what the false decretals were, and the donation of Constantine. They are admitted forgeries. They were discovered long, long ago in the 9th century to be exactly what they are. Made-up histories, forged documents. And the truth now remains. But isn't it surprising that the donation of Constantine and the false decretals are still part and parcel of the Roman Catholic canon law? And it's still believed by the popes. It's still maintained as their rightful authority to rule not only over spiritual things, but over temporal things as well. And by the power of these false decretals and the donation of Constantine, both admitted forgeries, the papacy claims divine right to rule over all the churches and all the nations as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's as if, yes, I know, you proved we got caught red-handed. It's been determined that these are all false decretals and the donation of Constantine is a forgery, but we're going with it. And the whole world's going to go with it. And so, the whole world goes with it. That is the deception that has overspread the entire world today. If it became a common discussion in every household about these false decretals and about the donation of Constantine and the pretended power of the popes over the churches and over the governments, there'd be a revolution, a global revolution by morning if common sense and righteousness prevailed. Every government would be overthrown because the foundation of every government is based on these false decretals and the donation of Constantine and the pretended power of the popes to rule over the kings of the earth. And every nation would discover that its civil laws are simply written in order to make every man, woman, and child in that nation conform to Roman Catholic canon law, which the Pope has no authority from God to write. He has no rightful authority over even himself. The whole world would be in revolution tomorrow if it became a common discussion of this almost universally accepted truth that the false decretals and the donation of Constantine are man-made forgeries because they form the very foundation of the papal power in the world today. Now, the Bible says that this man of sin will deceive the whole world. Let me ask my listeners a question. Has he deceived the whole world? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there any other institution in the history of the world that has so universally and absolutely deceived the whole world? Is there another candidate for this Antichrist, this papacy? No. And this is God's mercy toward us. No one can deceive us about who the Antichrist is, who the counterfeit Christ is. Because Christ came and died to bleed and redeem his own son, his own children. Okay? The Father in heaven gave us his Son as a ransom. It was Jesus' blood that made reconciliation for iniquity and brought in everlasting righteousness. Now, would God allow all the souls for whom his Son bled and died to redeem, would he then turn right around and leave us all subject to be deceived by a counterfeit Christ? If you believe that God, after sending his own Son, his only begotten Son, to bleed and die to redeem the souls of men, would then turn around and so wickedly play fast and loose with the souls for whom his Son bled and died to redeem, then you blaspheme God. And that's what the whole Christian world does today. This history that we're reading is the demonstration of the unlimited mercy of Almighty God, so that none of his sons and daughters could be deceived by this Antichrist. This broadcast, to many of my listeners, should be the most blessed gift you've ever received from on high. To know the truth about the history. To know the truth about the Antichrist, who has deceived the whole world. You are no longer deceived. Is that not God's mercy shed on your behalf? And I am blessed of Almighty God to be one of the instruments whereby his mercy is shed upon you. I received that same mercy myself. It was free. And I intend Inquisition Update to be free. Now, this history that we've been reading over the last months demonstrates that the papacy is not an institution of God. The devil, the dragon, gave the papacy his seat and power and great authority. History records the diabolical origin of the papacy. And it is even revealed to us the falsehoods of the false decretals and the forgery of the donation of Constantine that the papacy created in order to shed away the truth. And you are blessed of God to know the truth now. He says, as a proof of, we're beginning in subsection 2 on page 182, if you're following along. He says, as a proof of the priestly wickedness and knavery which could invent such an imposture, and the ignorance and the imbecility which could be duped by it, may be mentioned the forgery of the celebrated false decretals and the donation of Constantine, which appeared about the close of the 8th century, just out of nowhere. All of a sudden, these documents filled in all this blank history about the end of the 8th century, and by which during the whole of the 3 centuries of this midnight of the world, the arrogant pretensions of the pontiffs were established and maintained. Okay? The midnight of the world, the darkest period in human history, was the opportunity that Satan needed to elevate his vicar upon the earth to godlike status. And it was through the false decretals and the donation of Constantine that he accomplished it. The midnight of the world was the noonday for the papacy. When the world was steeped in darkness and ignorance and illiteracy and stupidity, and who worshiped images and idols and went to church every Sunday, Satan was elevating his man to the most powerful status known among men in the world ever, even until today. The midnight of the world was the noonday for the sun, and the arrogant pretensions of the pontiffs were established and maintained during this period of time. It said the object of these decretals, as they were called, was to persuade the multitude that in the first ages of the church, I would have appropriately used the word to persuade the world that in the first ages of the church, the bishops of Rome were possessed of the same spiritual majesty and authority as they now assumed. In other words, they didn't dig, scratch, and claw their way to power. They didn't assassinate their way to power. They didn't commit treason upon treason upon treason to gain their power. No, they instantly had it. They got it directly from God, and they exercised it all throughout the history of the popes. That's what they want you to believe. That's what these documents were written to achieve. To deny the diabolical climb to power that the popes exhibited, as is recorded in truthful history, but that they always had the power because they got it from God. He said they consisted of a pretended collection of rescripts and decrees of various popes of Rome, various bishops of Rome, from the 2nd to the 5th centuries, and other forged acts published with great ostentation and parade. Listen, if you're going to tell a lie, you got to tell a big one, and you got to have it associated with a great big parade. And that's what they did when these false decretals and this donation of Constantine suddenly surfaced at the end of the 8th century. They made a big to-do out of it. Okay? Fanfare, parties, parades, public pronouncements. Okay? He says they consisted of a pretended collection of rescripts and decrees of various bishops of Rome. That's right. Every official statement from the papacy throughout this unknown period, this blank space, was collected and assembled into big documents. The whole history of the popes, every time they acted with the power and the authority of God Almighty, they wrote it down. And all of a sudden, all of these rescripts and papal decrees showed up at the beginning of the 9th century. And it proves that the popes had all power as if they were God themselves. He says they consisted of a pretended collection of rescripts and decrees of various bishops of Rome from the 2nd to the 5th century. I wonder how long it took them to write all this crap. But they had to do it because the truth had to be buried. A new truth had to arise, and it had to be elaborate. It had to be voluminous. The papacy had to have been shown to be busy for those whole 3-4 centuries, climbing to power as if it were God himself on the earth. He says, and other forged acts published with great ostentation and parade in the 9th century with the name prefixed of Isidore, Bishop of Seville. You know, this Isidore, Bishop of Seville, must have been very knowledgeable, very powerful, and very, very popular among the people. And you got to ask yourself the common question: if Isidore, the Bishop of Seville, had possession of all these records for so long a time, and the bishops of Rome were so desperate to fill in the gap that they had, why did Isidore wait till the 8th century to present these documents to the popes? It's just something seems fishy here. In the 9th century, with the name prefixed of Isidore, Bishop of Seville, to make the world believe that they had been collected by that learned prelate some 2 or 3 centuries before. Yeah, the Bishop of Seville, Isidore over there, he's had possession of these documents for 3 or 4 centuries. They've been around some dusty library somewhere. And Isidore, through divine providence, you've got to believe this was divine providence, Isidore just slapped the dust off the shelf, and there they were. All this missing history. And what a history it was. Look at this Pope here, decreed that every man, woman, and child on the planet must be a subject of the Roman Pontiff. He must be a member of the Roman Catholic Church. He must be baptized by a priest. Holy cow! The popes had power all the way back to these guys. And that means they had it all the way back to Peter the Apostle, right? To make the world believe that they had been collected by that learned prelate some 2 or 3 centuries before. You got to admit, Rome knows how to create a miracle, don't they? He says the most important of these forged documents, by which the enormous power and assumptions of the popes for so many ages was justified and sustained, was the pretended donation of the Emperor Constantine the Great in the year 324. Yes, we've got now the historical record of the first Christian emperor in the world, Constantine the great saint of the Roman Catholic Church, Constantine the Great, in the year 324 A.D., literally bequeathed to the popes of Rome, the city of Rome, and all Italy. And not only that, but he gave the Pope his crown and his mitre. To who? Why, the Roman Catholic Pope Sylvester, who was then the Bishop of Rome. Did you know that's what it says in the donation of Constantine? It literally says that the popes did not dig and scratch and claw and kill and maim and murder, did not commit treason to ascend to the heights of the clouds, to sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, to be like the Most High. No. The Christian Emperor Constantine just dropped it in his lap, just like it was divine providence. As soon as Constantine got saved, he felt led of the Lord to just give the Pope the whole world. Since Constantine the Great literally ruled the whole world at that time, he was so thankful for the Pope and his salvation in Christianity, he just dropped the whole load right in the Pope's lap. The city of Rome and all of Italy, with his crown and his mitre, to Pope Sylvester, then Bishop of Rome. He says the following extract from this pretended deed of donation will be sufficient to show the character of this bungling imposture. Quote, "We attribute to the chair of St. Peter all the imperial dignity, glory, and power." This is Constantine speaking to the Pope in this so-called donation of Constantine, which was literally written by the popes themselves to justify their position in the world. Here we have Constantine the Great, supposedly, in this miraculously appearing donation of Constantine, gives the Pope the world. Look, what does your Bible say? The earth is mine and the fullness thereof. Is there anything ambiguous about that? No. The earth belongs to God, not to Constantine the Great. Okay? So what do we know right off the bat? The power of the Pope is not of God, and the earth does not belong to the Pope, because it didn't belong to Constantine the Great. So Constantine the Great cannot give the world to the Pope, either to rule over spiritual things or temporal things. The Bible makes it plain. The earth is mine and the fullness thereof. Now, this supposed donation of Constantine that just appeared at the appropriate time, just when it was most desperately needed by the papacy to prove its divine right status in the world from the get-go, depends upon this donation of Constantine. Now we're going to read some extracts from this donation of Constantine, which is still on record. He said the following extract from this pretended deed of donation, the donation of Constantine, will be sufficient to show the character of this bungling imposture. Here's a quote from the document. Quote, "We attribute to the chair of St. Peter," that is to the Pope, "all the imperial dignity, glory, and power." Unquote. It continues, "Moreover, we give to Sylvester, then the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and to his successors, our Palace of Lateran, incontestably one of the finest palaces in the world. We give him our crown," you must know that's a temporal crown, "our mitre," which is his religious hat, "our diadem," which is his power, "and all our imperial vestments." That's it. "My kingly robes I even give to the Pope." And he says, "We resign to him the imperial dignity." That's quite a donation, isn't it? Where did the Pope get his power, seat, and great authority? He says, "We give as a free gift to the Holy Pontiff the city of Rome and all the western cities of Italy, as well as the western cities of other countries." You see a loophole in this law? It was intended, it was written right in there by the popes. We've given the western cities of other countries yet to be named, right? Even those that have not yet even been discovered yet, like in the United States of America. To make room for him, we abdicate our sovereignty over all these provinces, and we withdraw from Rome, transferring our seat of our empire to Byzantium, since it is not just that a terrestrial emperor should retain any power where, quote, "God has placed the head of religion," unquote. This is straight out of the document. And you just got to know, it was written by the popes themselves. And it still forms the basis of Roman Catholic canon law today. The Roman Catholic canon law is nothing without the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine. Likewise, all the governments of the world are nothing without the donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals, which are admitted forgeries. Admitted forgeries. Even by Roman Catholic historians. As a matter of fact, it was Roman Catholics who discovered the fraudulent nature of these discoveries. It wasn't Protestants. It was Roman Catholic historians and church leaders who discovered the fraud that is the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine. And yet, the world continues to act according to these forgeries. Now, I want to ask my listeners another question. I'm good at asking questions because that's how you learn. You have to ask questions. if the papacy claims to have gotten its seat and power and great authority from God, and the Pope also says that the papacy got his seat and power and great authority from Jesus, and the Pope also says he got his seat, power, and great authority from the Apostle Peter, and he also says that he gets his seat, power, and great authority from the Virgin Mary, and he says he got his seat, power, and great authority from the Christian Emperor Constantine. What do we all automatically know? Even a child can answer this question. The Pope can't make up his mind where he got his seat, power, and great authority. The Pope doesn't know where he got his seat and power and great authority, or at least he's not admitting where he got it. But our Bible plainly tells us he got it from the dragon. But he can't admit that, can he? Otherwise, he couldn't deceive the whole Christian world. You know, there's always a perfect way to discover a liar. You can't tell the story the same way twice. Now, if the Pope says he got his seat and power and great authority from God, he got it from Jesus, he got it from St. Peter, he got it from Mary, he got it from Constantine, he's a liar, isn't he? And that's how he deceives the whole world. He deceives by lying, because that's how you deceive people. You lie. A third grader could figure this out. It takes no great intellect. I have no great intellect. I have the intellect that God gave every child. And with this information, I can come to no other childlike conclusion but that the Pope has no legitimate power in the world. Unless, of course, you consider Satan as a legitimate power. Have I made my point? Or rather, has the donation of Constantine and the Pseudo-Isidorian decretals made my point? Subsection 3. This memorable donation was, near to the close of the 8th century, introduced to the world, says the eloquent historian Gibbon, quote, by the epistle of Pope Adrian I to the Emperor Charlemagne, in which he exhorts Charlemagne to imitate the liberality of the great Constantine. In other words, Charlemagne, I have crowned you. I have placed your imperial crown upon your head, and you're going to be the new Constantine, and you're going to keep giving to me more seats, more power, and more great authority. Otherwise, you're a government de facto, and I'll replace you. Right? I can take the crown off of your head just as I put it on your head. So, Charlemagne, you're the new Constantine the Great. You keep giving me more and more and more power and seat and great authority. Now, it says, according to legend, the first of the Christian emperors, that is Constantine the Great, according to Roman Catholic legend, the first of the Christian emperors, Constantine the Great, was healed of the leprosy and purified in the waters of baptism by Saint Sylvester, the Roman bishop. And never was a physician more gloriously recompensed. Okay? So, Rome has even fabricated the baptism and the healing of leprosy of the Emperor Constantine. Okay? This is all part and parcel of Rome's quote-unquote legend. And Constantine was so thankful that the Bishop of Rome, Sylvester, the Pope of Rome, Sylvester, was so powerful in godly power that he healed him from leprosy. He just left him the whole world as a gift. That's what the donation of Constantine is. He says, never was a physician more gloriously recompensed. His royal proselyte, Constantine the Great, withdrew from his seat and patrimony of St. Peter, declared his resolution of founding a new capital in the East, that's Constantinople, and resigned to the popes the free and perpetual sovereignty of Rome, Italy, and the provinces of the West. This fiction, this fiction was productive of the most beneficial effects. Beneficial to whom? The popes, of course. I mean, it just in a day, God dropped the whole world in the Pope's lap through the hands of Constantine the Great. It says the Greek princes were convinced of the guilt of usurpation. Okay? What did these donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals do? Besides giving the Pope all his seat and power and great authority? It finally convinced the deceived world that the Greek princes, that is, the emperors in the East, in Constantinople, and their religious patriarchs there in Constantinople. You know, the one who originally desired the title Universal Bishop, who was to be the bishop of all bishops. When all of a sudden this history of the donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals dropped in the Pope's hands, it was settled in the deceived world that the Greek princes had nothing but usurpation to boast about. The power and seat and great authority always resided with the Bishop of Rome. See, that's what these falsehoods, these forgeries, accomplish. They, in and of themselves, without saying a word, convinces the world that the emperors in the East and the religious leaders of the East in Constantinople, those who first challenged the papacy for the title Universal Bishop, were usurpers. You know, they really were crafty when they created these forged documents. It won the war between the Bishop of Rome and the Bishop of Constantinople. The Bishop of Rome is the undisputed victor now, that these forged documents are now accepted by the world as real documents. The Greek princes were convicted of the guilt of usurpation and the revolt of Pope Gregory. Remember, Pope Gregory was the one who committed treason against the emperor, seeking for himself a title of emperor in the West. He committed treason against the lawful government in Constantinople. He would have been shot for treason. Pope Gregory. It says the revolt of Pope Gregory was claimed of his lawful inheritance. That's what these pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine accomplished for Gregory, the Pope. He was no longer treasonous. He always had divine right, not only to the West, but to the East and to the whole world. The emperors in the East, the religious leaders in the East were all usurpers. The power resided in the popes from the very beginning. That's what these donation of Constantine and pseudo-Isidorian decretals accomplished for the papacy. You know, we always kind of tip our hat to the one who can kill the most birds with one stone. In this case, with the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine, the Pope is given a scattergun. Not just a stone, he's given a scattergun. He is destroying all opposition in the world by these two false documents. These two man-made documents. These two forgeries. And it says the popes were delivered from their debt of gratitude, and the nominal gifts of the Carolingians were no more than the just and irrevocable restitution of a sanctity portion, a scanty portion of the ecclesiastical state. What's he just told you? He's just told you that Pepin and Charlemagne, who had conquered the Lombards and had given power of governorship over the papal states to the Pope, in other words, made the Pope a king among kings, were not that big a deal after all. Because the donation of Constantine made the Pope the king all along. You see what I mean about the scattergun that is the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine? All of a sudden, never mind that the popes were begging and pleading and that even conjured up a letter from St. Peter himself in heaven to goad the Carolingians, Pepin and Charlemagne, to come to the rescue of the popes, because the hordes were about to destroy him and the Romans. And all the great works that the Carolingians did, the Pepin and Charlemagne, were really nothing at all, because the Pope was king all along by divine right. And really, if he was king all along, even Charlemagne is no biggie. Or rather, Emperor Constantine is not all that important. I mean, after all, if you get your power and seat and great authority from God and Jesus and the Virgin Mary and the Apostle Peter, what do you need to Constantine the Great or the Carolingians, Pepin and Charlemagne? You see the purpose of these forged documents? He says, and the nominal gifts of the Carolingians were no more than the just and irrevocable restitution of a scanty, just a little tiny portion of the ecclesiastical state. What is the ecclesiastical state according to the donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals? The whole world. Yet to be determined. It says the sovereignty of Rome no longer depended on the choice of a fickle people, and the successor of St. Peter and Constantine were invested with the purple and prerogatives of Caesars. That's what they accomplished, these forged documents. Made the Pope a god and a king. And not only that, the God of gods and the King of kings. That's what's accomplished by these pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine. Now you know who has control over the governments of the world and under what authority and from what authority. The donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals. The Pope doesn't care what the people think. He gets his power and seat and great authority from his God, Satan, and the Bible plainly tells us. And the dragon gave him his seat and power and great authority. And it says, so deep was the ignorance and credulity of the times that this most absurd of fables was received with equal reverence in Greece and in France, and is still enrolled among the decrees of the canon law. There, now you see it in print. The pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine are admitted forgeries, and yet they still form the very foundations of the Roman Catholic canon law. And the world's going with it. The world is still going with it. It says the emperors and the Romans were incapable of discerning a forgery that subverted their rights and freedoms. You know what? We're just as ignorant as they are. We've lost all of our rights and all of our freedoms to the Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine. Whenever our rights and freedoms and liberties are taken away from us, they're done on the basis of Roman Catholic canon law, which sits upon the foundation of the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine. And at the time of these forgeries, the only opposition to them proceeded from a Sabine monastery, an order of monks in the territory of Sabine, Sabine, if you want to pronounce it that way. It's in central Italy, not far from Rome, which in the beginning of the 12th century disputed the truth and validity of the donation of Constantine. So where did the first opposition of this donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals come from? a Roman Catholic monastery in Sabine, or Sabine. It's Roman Catholics who first disputed these forged documents. It wasn't Protestants. Do you know that the world was full of Protestants at that time? They were literate. They read their Bible. They knew the Bible said the dragon gave him his seat and power and great authority, so they didn't muddle themselves with the papacy, except that every Sabbath they would get together and preach about this unholy usurper, this antichrist, this counterfeit Christ in the world, and warned God's people never to be entangled with him and to denounce him as antichrist everywhere they went, so that God's people would never be deceived by this great deceiver. And Rome was quietly putting them to death everywhere they were found. And their voices were finally silenced for fear of this Roman Antichrist. You see, Paul predicted his rise, called him the man of sin, the son of perdition, which literally puts to shame all of the gross sins of the ancient Roman Caesars who feasted upon the blood and the carcasses of God's holy people. This Roman Catholic papal usurper would kill and maim and murder and torture and confiscate the goods and the lives of the saints to a degree never heard before in the history of the world. And while this history is unfolding in the pages of this book, God's people are dying everywhere by the most hideous means. Anyone who raised a voice against this divine right ruler in Rome was summarily dispatched by whatever means at its disposal. And the kings of the earth who ruled under the authority of the papacy made it their business to pursue God's people and to destroy them, and finally silence their incessant decrees that the papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist of the Bible. And especially after the pseudo-Isidorian decretals and the donation of Constantine became known in the world by this most ignorant, blind, spiritually naked world. In the midnight of the world was the noonday of the sun, the noonday of the papal sun. And God's people died, and only God knows how many lives were claimed by the Roman pontiffs. The earth is soaked with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. Anyone, even to this day, who speaks out publicly in any popular form that the papacy is nothing but the man of sin, the son of perdition, the beast, the little horn, the Antichrist of the Bible, is pursued and persecuted until he's finally silenced or destroyed. If you live godly in Christ Jesus, you will suffer persecution. I'll see you tomorrow.